You might not know this, but we just passed a 50-year anniversary mark that I don't know if some of you might remember this, but back in 1974 was when Philippe Petit took his famous high wire walk between the Twin Towers. So it was pretty crazy because it was, of course, illegal for him to be doing that. And so for weeks ahead of time, he and a crew of friends had been posing as construction workers to go up to the tops of the towers and scout out what they needed to do. And then the night before, a friend of his shot an arrow attached to the wire across from one to the other, and that's how they strung the wire across there. And so then he gets up there and do this. But if I were, well, first of all, I wouldn't, but if I were doing this, my whole goal would be to get across to the other side as fast as I possibly could do it. But that's not what he did. He took 45 minutes and went back and forth 8 times. Yeah, and he actually even laid down. I mean, that's a little showing off there. But yeah, he just took his time out there on this wire. And not only that, I said it was the 50th anniversary of that. He's now 74. So guess what? He just had this special event to commemorate the 50th anniversary, and they strung he was arrested too right after it because it was illegal, by the way. But then they dropped the charges. And so here he is 50 years later. He says he's actually better now than he was then. They strung this up in St. John the Divine Cathedral, which is the largest cathedral in the world that's there in Manhattan. And he did he reenacted the whole performance right down to the arrest and everything. But walked his audience through everything that was happening, even did, again, lay down again on the wire. What you can't see in that picture is Sting is actually playing live down below. So, I mean, it was a pretty big deal. But he said this that I thought was so fascinating. He said, most people say, oh, come on, you're wasting your life walking rope. No, I say, I'm actually driving my life. I drive my life on that wire. I am carrying my life. We're coming into another political season, as you're all aware. I don't have to tell anybody that. But I think sometimes as we're going through times like this, it can feel like you're walking a tightrope, right? I mean, New Day this is now our 6th presidential election that we've weathered together. First one, in case anybody's wondering, was George W. versus John Kerry, which that feels like mild days, right? Simpler times back then. But we've gone through these election cycles together, and we've always said that New Day as a church probably cancels each other out on election day, because we really are maybe somewhat unique as a congregation in that we have intentionally tried to build a place where people from all kinds of different political persuasions can come together and worship together. And sometimes I have to admit my strategy for navigating these times has been, let's get to the other side as quick as we can, right? Like, let's just try to not bring anything up and just move on through it and get to the other side. And that's not really keeping a true peace. That's not genuine. And I think, like Philippe Petit was saying, about how people think that's a waste of time to spend your time in that space in between. I think that's exactly where the church is called to be, especially in such divided times as these. I think we as a congregation, as followers of Jesus, have something to speak into division that Nobody else has. And I think it's important for us to do that honestly and with integrity and with no fear. I don't think there is need for us to come in wondering how we're going to get through this season. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about that up front in the next couple of weeks. I specifically chose that headline to be a little bit of a play on words of crossing the divide, not just getting across it, but actually taking the cross and applying the cross to the division. Because I want us to think through, what does it mean to see this divide through the lens of Jesus? How does that change things for us? It might seem a little odd to consider for you this fact that Jesus has always had politically diverse disciples. You may not even normally think about his first disciples as even being political. I don't. I think of them as kind of almost mythical characters, not quite real people. But you look at Jesus and this table that he himself assembled, and it's a little, my recreation of this is a little deceptive because all the disciples look the same, when actually they were very different. They were very different personalities, different employment, and different politics as well. Just take Matthew on one end there of the table, and Simon, who was opposite him, not Simon Peter, but just the other Simon. And you had Matthew, who's the tax collector, and then you have Simon, who was a zealot. Now, tax collectors, they were actually funding the Roman government. This is why a lot of times his fellow countrymen didn't think much of his profession, because they were not only extorting money from people and charging exorbitant taxes, but they were then giving that to the oppressive government, foreign government that was over Israel at the time. And so you've got Matthew on that end, support of the government, and then you've got Simon the Zealot, and the Zealots wanted to overthrow the government, and they wanted to do it with violence. They wanted to do it with force. And both of these guys were invited to the table with Jesus. Isn't that interesting to just consider what that must have been like, some of their conversations, how they navigated that? And sometimes I think we think that Jesus was maybe somewhere here in the middle, and he's saying, you guys, can't we all compromise a little bit and meet here? I don't think that's how to conceive of it at all. I think when Jesus talks to us about his kingdom, it's a totally other dimension. It takes us out of this thing between us here, this one plane that we operate on when we get into our political arguments, which matter. All politics do matter. The issues are important. It's not like those don't count, but the greater thing for not just Matthew and Simon, but for me and you, is to get off of this line and to keep our eyes on Christ and see how, as we are moving more towards him together, we're also moving closer to each other. So what does that actually mean for us as we go into this time? I want to look at a passage with you this morning of a little story that is a political incident between a couple of Jesus, actually all of Jesus' disciples. So this is taken out of the book of Mark. And here it is. It says, then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who Jesus called sons of thunder, and you'll kind of see why as we're going through this here. The sons of Zebedee came to him. Teacher, they said, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. I mean, that's pretty audacious, right? But if we're honest, I think we want Jesus to do whatever we ask, don't we? I mean, really, that's why we're asking him, because we want him to do what we're asking him, right? When we go to him, we are asking, and I think we're asking, especially when it comes to politics, I think our assumption is that Jesus shares our agenda. That what I'm coming to him with, he's going to be on board with, because I'm his follower, and it's just sort of this circular thing that Jesus must agree with my approach and what I'm thinking. And it's more complicated than that, isn't it? I mean, Jesus might agree with an underlying value that we have behind the thing, the issue that we're concerned about, but he may not approve of our strategy whatsoever. That may be completely other. And we can jump to this assumption that he's on board. And that's certainly what these two brothers are thinking, that of course Jesus is going to get on board with this. So they say, we'd like you to do whatever we ask. And Jesus asks a smart question in return. What do you want me to do for you? He asked. They replied, let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory. So they've heard him talking about his kingdom, and they are strategizing ahead of time. What's their place going to be in this? Which automatically makes this a political question. So I want to just ask you, when you hear the word politics, how would you define politics? What do you have a working definition of that word? It's a nice, safe, neutral question to ask in a conversation like this today. Anybody have a definition? I want to hear from Dean. I know Dean's got it. I was thinking Dean probably had something, but
it's the art of convincing someone to do something they may or not want to do.
That is an interesting way to think about it. The art of convincing someone to do something they may or may not want to do. Yeah, there's something to that. Anybody have anything to add that comes to mind when you think the word politics?
The way a group of people makes a decision.
The way a group of people makes a decision. Yeah. Because it inherently involves a certain amount of compromise and negotiation, right?
I think originally it might have meant, if William were here, he would tell you.
Yes.
He'd have a good he'd have a discourse.
Yes.
From what little I've read, it has to do, I think originally it meant an orderly way to conduct life as a community or a group of people. I mean, that would be the ideal.
Yes. I like the idea of orderly. That's that seems to be missing a little bit. But yeah. Yes. Yeah, I think so. One definition, this isn't the only definition, but I didn't make this up, this I pulled from a dictionary, is that it's conflict among individuals or parties having or hoping to achieve power. There is that dynamic. It's groups working, negotiating, working together, and also trying to get people to do what they want. That's that striving for power there. And I think power is maybe the operative word that comes into play with certainly with the two disciples here that we're talking about, that they're looking for power. And you go, well, even power, power to do what? I think there are several things that come to mind with politics. First of all, it's influence over opinions. We want to change people's opinions. That's why you always see all the polls wondering what people's opinions are. Control of circumstances. I want to vote to make this legal and make this illegal. We like to control that. We'd like authority to enforce our will, to have people to act the way we want them to. That's a political wish. But freedom to do what I want to do, that's another kind of power. I want to be able to do the things I want. And also, I want the status to be heard. So when you hear about student protests and stuff, they come with their demands that they want to be heard. They want to be taken seriously. They want the administration to listen to them. That's all about power, right? It's all this striving for power. And that's what these two disciples are looking ahead. They're thinking about what's coming for Jesus, and they're calling it ahead of time. They're calling dibs, and they're saying, we're putting our names in now to be your right and left hand guys. You don't know what you're asking. Jesus said, can you drink the cup I drink or be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with? Meaning his death is what he's talking about there. Can you go through the same horrible things I'm going to go through? We can, they answered. Again, sons of thunder, coming with the boldness here. Jesus said to them, you will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with, but to sit at my right or left, it's not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared. The only picture we have of Jesus sitting on his throne is out of Revelation. Who's sitting next to him? It's God the Father, right? They're basically asking for God's place. And so Jesus is going, you don't even know what you're talking about. You don't even know what you're asking. Well, when the other 10 disciples from around the table, when they heard this, they became indignant with James and John. Can you believe those guys? That they would dare to ask that? I should be the one to get that spot, right? I mean, you know Luke tells us that they were arguing over who was going to be the greatest. And so you know that it's not just that they're mad at them for having the audacity to ask that. They're also kind of thinking, well, if anybody's going to be, naturally it's going to be me. And so there's that, but this offense that they take, and I think the thing is that indignation is so easy. When we hear people doing their thing or trying to grab for the kind of power they want to get done what their agenda is, it's so easy for us to get utterly offended. Wouldn't it be awesome if Christians earned a reputation as being the least offendable people? Wouldn't that be something? Because they're both, they're both coming from a human place. And here's what happens. It says Jesus called them together. So he gets the 2 over here and the 10 over here, and he calls them all together because Christ's word is to everyone on both sides. Okay, so what he's going to say to us is for all of us to hear and all of us to take to heart and pay attention to, no matter where we are at with our politics. This is what he is saying to us. He called them together and said, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles, those who are like the political officials in nations all around the world, this is how it all works. They lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. They take advantage of the fact that they're in power, and they say, well, we're in power. We're going to make sure our side gets what it wants, and they exercise authority over them. And then he says, not so with you. As my followers, this is not how I want you to be acting. He said, instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first must be a slave of all. Instead of trying to be the person in the room with the most power, I want you to strive to be the person with the least power, to give away power. And you just go, that just hardly computes for us. That is so foreign of a concept to try to adopt the attitude of how I can serve other people instead. That's just so hard for us to even wrap our minds around. Russell Moore talks with a lot of pastors all over the country, and he said a lot of times he'll talk to pastors who will begin quoting the Sermon on the Mount to their congregations, and especially when they get to the part about turning the other cheek. And people out of their congregation will get all grumbly with them and say, well, where are you getting those liberal ideas? And then the pastor tells them, well, actually, that's not a liberal or conservative idea. That's Christ. That's the words of Christ. And Russell Moore said, what's alarming to me is that the response is not, oh, I need to listen to Jesus. Instead, the response from congregants is often, yes, but that doesn't apply to politics. That doesn't work when the stakes are so high. That's what we can think, is that maybe this applies to personal relationships, but not to our politics or anything like that. And yet you look at the situation that Jesus was talking about, and he's using politics as his frame of reference, as the way the world operates in government. And he's saying, not so with you. That's not how you're supposed to think about even your politics. So if we go back to this little thing of like getting off of this one plane of how we think about power and grabbing for it or getting our wishes, and Jesus taking us off of that, I think the way this impacts our politics is that the who shapes the how of our what. So if you think of the what being the issues at hand, the concerns that we have, and they're big concerns. I don't care whether it is about racial justice, whether it's about abortion, whether it's about immigration, whether you pick the topic, that these are significant, important things, and we can again think that Jesus has the same agenda that we have, but the how of how we go at these things that we care about, that's where the who of Jesus should impact the way we handle the how around our what. Does that make sense? That's a little complicated. I've tried to make that as complicated as I could to say something very simple. But really, Jesus being the one to shape this for us. And what he's saying is, I want you to think in terms of service. Well, like we defined politics, how are we going to define service? Anybody have a good working definition of service?
Meeting the needs of others.
Say that again?
Meeting the needs of others.
Meeting the needs of others. Yeah. Yeah, anything to add to that? That's a pretty good one. Yes, I think that's really the key, because it's easy to do things for other people if you think you're going to benefit from it. But really, I think service is that. It's attending to the needs. I mean, it's like you guys peeked ahead here at the slide. Very good. Yeah, like it's to just offer this to somebody regardless of what you get back. I've been reading a book called The After Party that's about having political conversations for churches, and they have a whole video series as well that they've done with this to kind of guide congregations in thinking about some of these things. It's really, really well done. But there's one video in it that is Nancy French is the one who's telling her story in this, and it's a great little video. We'll post it in the newsletter so you can watch the whole thing. I'm just going to summarize for you because it's a little bit a political columnist. He's a conservative Christian columnist who writes for the New York Times and the Atlantic and the National Review, things like that. So, very well-known author. Nancy is also an author. In fact, she's one of the authors of this book. But so she sees her husband has gotten historically a lot of hate mail from a lot of different people, and she has watched his social feeds and seen just a lot of really mean things said to her husband, and that's difficult to take, and there's one woman in particular, Kathy Kattenberg, who did not like anything pretty much that David French had to write, especially about abortion. She disagreed with him entirely. He's very pro-life, and she believes in the right to a woman's right, reproductive rights, and so she routinely would send him messages again and again that oftentimes were very personal and attacking him for his views. And so Nancy would see these come in. Well, in 2016, Nancy published her own story in the Washington Post, and she told there a story that she really hadn't told anybody about her own survival of abuse from a vacation Bible school leader when she was young. And she shared this story publicly, and she got a ton of negative hate mail. But the hate mail was not from the people that she disagreed with politically. It was the conservative Christian tribe that came at her viciously, like she shouldn't have exposed one of their own or something. And so she just found herself thrown by this fact that people that she aligned with ideologically were coming at her. And she decided that she was instead going to just follow people who showed her a measure of kindness. Rather than people she agreed with, she was going to follow the kindness. Well, guess who reached out to her with a kind message? But Kathy Kattenberg, who said to her, I don't agree with anything your husband says, but I read your story, and that took a lot of courage, and it was very moving for me. And I just wanted to say, well done. Thank you for your story. Well, Nancy hung on to that encouragement that she got from her, and she just sat with that and the disconnect there between where this woman was politically versus this kindness that she had expressed. Pandemic comes along, and Kathy posts. She lives in New York, and she's like, I think I just may have eaten my last meal because I can't get any food. I can't get any groceries because the stores were shut down and all the delivery services was a mess, and there was just no way to get anything. Nancy reaches out to her, and she says, how can I help? And she sets about problem solving, working with Nancy, figuring out how she can serve her by getting food to her, just very practically how she can get food. Well, long story short, that created a long-term relationship between these two women who became great friends. Kathy, to this day, will say, Nancy is the best friend I've ever had in my life. And she's also met and gotten to know David French and describes him as one of the kindest people that she's ever met. And you go, what made the difference? Neither one of them, I don't think, has necessarily moved anywhere politically, but it comes back to this idea of kindness and service, of Kathy showing kindness and Nancy choosing to say, how can I serve you in this moment of need, even though we don't agree? So powerful. I just love that example for us. Well, you go, okay, Jesus is asking us of this, asking this of us, asking us to engage in service, but what's our motivation for doing that? Why would we opt for that instead of power play? And he goes on in talking with his disciples, and he says, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Okay, so Jesus is saying, this is how I'm operating, which you go, that's an example for us. But then you get to this final phrase in that verse where it says, he came to give his life as a ransom for many. And that takes it into a different dimension for us. And I think, because if you look at Psalm 49, which we quoted a few weeks ago, where it says, no one can redeem the life of another or give to God a ransom for them. The ransom for a life is costly. No payment is ever enough so that they should live on forever and not see decay. In other words, we can't follow Jesus there. We can't give our life as a ransom for many, because guess what? We can't do that. We can't, the cost is too high. We can't be a ransom for others. So here's the thing. I think that the main thing is not for us to be like Christ. Although that's important, that we are striving to follow his example. But the main thing is not for us to be like Christ. The main thing is that Christ is unlike anyone. That is the key to this, that we are to see that Christ in what he is doing something none of us can do, which first of all means that we are going to need his power at work within us, his Spirit within us to give us the capacity even. We can't just on our own say we're going to go around serving people out of our altruistic natures. It has to come from Christ. And because He alone is able to do this. And to give us, that word there for ransom is not the ransom like for a kidnapping. It's a ransom of freeing somebody from slavery. And He has freed us up from our need to be enslaved by the systems of the world that just operate the same way. And He's giving us something that enables us to choose differently. And we serve because service reveals Christ. We said last week, when we were talking about sharing faith, we said the only thing you can share is what it is you've seen. What have you seen of Jesus? Well, one of the ways we see Him more is through service. We see Him as we engage in service ourselves, and we see Him in the service of other people. Service reveals Christ. Kindness reveals Christ as well. It's as we are doing that we get to see more of Christ. And that's really what the world needs. It needs to see more of Jesus. It doesn't need to see more of us trying to be kind. It needs to see more of Jesus, because Jesus is the one who makes the difference. Does that make sense? Any thoughts on that particular point?
I think your list could just go on and on. Tenderness.
Yes.
Patience reveals Christ.
Yes.
And when we finish, we would look at all these words and nothing would feel like the political season.
Yes.
And just what a place for us to sit with.
Yeah. I mean, if we were able to reveal some of that in the next few months here, that'd be awesome. So given that, I have a few little commitments that I'd like to ask of us as a congregation as we go into this political season. They're not all that clever. I think they're pretty basic, but this is I think we just want to state them and spell them out here as we go into the next few months. First of all, to acknowledge that people who love Jesus have different views, and they're welcome. It's not just that we're going to tolerate people who have different politics than us here, and you're okay as long as you sit in your section or whatever. But to really go, no, we are a church that is going to celebrate the fact that we have a variety, and it's okay. And nobody's going to try to enforce their politics on you here. Everybody's welcome at the table. Secondly, we're going to avoid generalizations and vilifying others. Don't speak in broad terms about one group or another. I'll just say, Democrats are not baby killers and Marxists any more than Republicans are Nazis and racists. Right? Like, you can't broadly say those kinds of labels. Those are hurtful, and they dehumanize people to put them in just big blanket statements like that. Let's be careful about avoiding those kinds of generalizations. Let's deal with individuals. And then I think paying attention to what we're paying attention to. So wherever you get your news and your media and the politicians that you are listening to or paying attention to, listen to where they're doing the generalizations and the vilifying. And even if you support that person or that cause or whatever, to separate out and be able to think critically about them and to not go there with them. To realize that politics is the art of manipulation and there are people that want to shape your opinions, and so to go, you know what? I can see it for what it is. I don't have to totally distance myself from it, but I need to not go where they want to take me. Okay? So let's pay attention to what we're paying attention to. And then finally, I would just say to value seeing Christ over winning. Like, the most important thing in this is to see more of Jesus at work in our lives, in each other's lives. And even though whatever agenda we may want out there may feel ultimately important, it's secondary in importance to the how of being influenced by the who of Jesus and recognizing him more in our lives. So I just want to lead us in a prayer as we close and invite you to just take a moment and consider for yourself where you'd like to see in your own heart maybe a measure more of kindness. Would you ask Christ to give you more capacity to be kind to maybe one specific individual that comes to mind that you know you disagree with in this season? Can you ask him for an increase there? And then ask him if he would show you a way that you can serve somebody who is different from you. What's a real practical way you can do something to build relationship across a divide? Lord Jesus, I thank you that you do invite all of us to the table. You know that we don't really get all the aspects of your kingdom. We don't really understand fully how everything works, and we get all confused in our place in it. Forgive us for that, Lord. Forgive us for our presumption that you share all our same agendas. And I pray, Lord, for us as a congregation that we would grow in our capacity to really love each other well and to be kind. And God, that even in this time that feels like walking tightrope sometimes, that we would recognize more of you in each other. And so we welcome you to show us even in the difficulty, Lord, use the tension as a way to grow us and to grow us up. It's in your name we pray. Amen.